Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I probably look like a hot mess right now, and the reason for that is because I just finished the Infernal devices. I fell in love with Cassandra Clare and the whole Shadowhunters world when I was about 14, 13. Don't quote me on that, but it was basically when the Shadowhunters TV show came out and I started watching it, and then from there I went to the books. So I have read these bad boys before, and let me tell you, there was a lot of things that I missed out on. So this is your sign to go and reread your old favourite books, because you will have most likely missed little bits and bobs that are important for the story. So I thought I would do a little vlog video thing talking about my thoughts, my feelings, going over some of the plots. So this is your spoiler warning. I'm going to be talking about these books. If you have not read these books, please go and do it. I recommend... What do I recommend? There are a lot of books in this series about the same world. So I like these. These are standalone books. You can read these and get information from it. There are also the Mortal Instrument series. I've read most of those books. Didn't love them as much as these. These are my pride and joy. These everyone has that one book or that series that aligns with you. These are my books. If someone was to ask me my favourite top 3 books, I would say all of these books. I cannot pick and choose between. I mean, if I really had to and someone had a gun to my head, I would probably say the first book is my favourite. But even then, just as a trilogy, everything is so perfect and wrapped, and I just love it. And I'm so glad that I went through and reread them again. So please, I do recommend reading them if fantasy and demons and vampires and werewolves, if that is your stick and you enjoy that. And this is a period piece. These books are set in the late 1800s, so if this is your kind of thing and your vibe, I would definitely recommend checking it out and leaving this video for now until you have read them, and then come back and then we can talk about them. For those of you that have stayed and have read the books before, let's talk about this, because when I say I finished these, I mean literally like 20 minutes ago, if that. So it's fresh in my head and I have a lot of thoughts. Editing tea here, popping in to give a little self-promo. I seem to forget to mention this in every video, but I have a blog. It's called Indecisive Royalty, the same as it is on here, and I upload different reviews, and I want to eventually upload analysis type stuff about different films and TVs, so if that is your thing, go on over and check it out. I have also recently started posting my short stories as I get back into writing, because I've been out of touch, as I've mentioned in previous videos, so it would mean a lot if you pop on over. The link will be in the description. It's all in my link tree, which will be below. If you just click on that, it will come up with a bunch of my links, including the blog. There are also all my other social medias that you can give a little follow. I post a lot on Instagram and TikTok. Those are my main pivots, but every now and then you'll see me post on Blue Sky. I've also started a Fable, which is up there. I haven't posted much because I literally started it just as I finished the Infernal devices, but I am also currently reading a book called He's to Die For, so any posts that I do about that will be on there. And I'm also thinking of possibly doing a little Hunger Games series, perhaps. But please, if you want to, check it all out. It would mean a lot to me. Anyway, back to the video, and you're going to want to stick around because shit gets emotional. When I read these books for the first time, I did not understand the significance of everything that was being written. I think there's a big difference between reading stories when you are a child and you are growing up in a preteen and enjoying the stories and the fantasy, and then actually rereading it as an adult and realising, holy shit, there's so much more symbolism and deep richness to all of these words that I can only now absorb that I'm a little bit older and I understand what's going on. Let's talk about some of the smaller things that I learned while reading these books, because 13-year-old me remembered Will as being blonde. I think the reason for this is because I had just not long finished the Mortal Instrument series, and I had just got off of Jace, and sorry, spoilers for the Mortal Instruments fans as well, skip like 20 seconds. Because Jace was revealed to be a Wayland and he had blonde hair, I think I then, in my head, had it set that Will was also blonde haired. That is not true. He is black haired in the book, and yet every time I read about him and she would talk about his dark hair and dark features, all I could think about was that he was blonde, and I could not get it into my head that he was anything apart from a blonde. I thought the same of Camille and Jessamine. Disclaimer, I don't know actually how to pronounce her name, so I'm going to say Jessamine or Jasmine, because it's not Jasmine, it's Jessamine, but that doesn't sound right and I want to say Jasmine. So if I mess it up, we all know who we're talking about, okay? But again, because I found this series and this world through the TV show, I always pictured Camille as being a dark-haired black-haired character. She's blonde in the books. It makes no sense for my little tiny pea brain because I've got this one impression in my head, and now that's just everything that I process it as. So just the little character summaries I had to reread and get used to because I was always picturing them something different. Taking a very steer turn, I want to talk about Jessamine specifically as a character. I love her so deeply to my core. The author does such a good job at making you feel almost conflicted but in love with Jessamine as a character. I know that it's difficult to try and relate to her. I think for me, seeing that juxtaposition of having this person and this character who was born into a life of shadow hunting when she doesn't want it, it's such a valid point alone. There are many people who were soldiers and did not want to be soldiers and it was their only option. And it's so sad to see her strive and beg and just want this normal life, and it's something that she can never get, and it's so tragically beautiful to see. And not just that, but she is a woman in the 1800s, so it's not exactly common, at least in the mundane world, for a woman to be in positions of power and to fight. That is seen as a man's job, it's seen as masculine, and she wants to be presented as something so feminine and beautiful, and she wants so desperately to be loved. Jessamine as a character just wants to be so loved and devoted to, and I mean there is the tricky part of, does she genuinely want to be loved and have this mundane normal life because that is what she craves, to be a mother and to be a wife, or is this just because it was thrust upon her by the expectations of society at that time? It is a very fine line, and I think a large portion of her feeling this way and striving so deeply and tragically is because it's the life that her parents wanted. Obviously we learn her parents died when she was very, very young, and they never wanted this life for her. They wanted her to be normal and to love and to be a wife and have a husband and children and be safe and not have to risk her life killing all of these monsters. And because it was like their last dying wish to keep her sheltered and away from harm, and that's what made her so dedicated and decidedly want to escape and have that normal life for her parents, because it was their wish. And it's very interesting to have that character who is so devoted to her parents and the life that they wanted her to have and be protected, in contrast to Will, whose parents wanted the exact same thing. His father obviously married a mundane and escaped his life of shadow hunting for her because he was so devoted to her love for her and having a family. And in a way, the start of the book seemed to frame it as he fell in love and he was so deeply in love that that's why he left. But towards the end of the series, it really frames it differently, especially when Cecily comes in, which, side note, I had no idea Cecily comes into this. I have no memory at all. I don't know what I was focusing on. Well, I know what I was focusing on, but I have no memory of Cecily being in the story. I knew that she existed, and I know that Will had that sister that was still alive, but I had no memory of her being such a prominent character towards the end of the series. So her turning up was like a total whiplash moment. But when she did turn up, and she herself had this mission of bringing her brother back, because she felt like the Shadow Hunter world had stolen him, rather than him willingly wanting to stay and craving to stay. Not just for Jem, but for the environment. He craved the fight. He has that Shadow Hunter blood. He has that willingness to protect. And seeing Cecily not just watch her brother in his element and realise this is where he's meant to be, but then having to fight those feelings herself and realising she has let her deepest, darkest sin happen by also wanting to stay. And she says in the books herself, it isn't so much about her parents shielding her from this life and not wanting her to go risk her life and save people, but wanting them to have the chance to choose. And in a way, as Jessamine and Will are two sides of the same coin, Cecily is the middle point. We have Jessamine, who was thrusted into this life and didn't want it and would do anything to escape it. Will, who was unknowingly thrusted into this life, thinking that he was saving his family from any harm, and yet learning that he was in love with it and that he wanted to stay. And then Cecily, who had the chance to choose. She went to the institute looking for her brother, hoping that he would come home, being able to go back to normal, and then realising this is what she wants. She had the choice after visiting the institute and living with her family for 15 years. She had the choice. She knew what it was like to fight, and she knew what it was like to live a mundane life, and she got the chance to choose. The only character I have seen have the chance to choose, and she chose the institute, which was her right. It was her choice. but it's also the only character who knowingly had an option. And Cecily was such a beautiful character to see. It was so clear that when she first came, she had one mission. It was to get her brother to convince him to come back. And slowly, she not just fell in love with the love of the fight, being able to be in the battle, saving others, but also the people there. She was able to bond again with her brother. She was able to make friends with Tessa and Sophie, and ultimately even fell in love with Gabriel. Which, Gabriel, when did this happen? I mean, I have no recollection of Cecily, so I should have at least had some unknowing support that Gabriel may actually end up together. I thought they were just going to be a little friendly and flirty, and then nothing was going to happen. They get married! They have children! Gabriel, in himself, has such an arc in the story. When I read this for the first time, I want you to hold my hand when I say this, because it's very embarrassing and I'm being nice to you, okay? When I read this for the first time, I fell in love with the character of Gideon. And I still love him, don't get me wrong, I really do. But when I read it this time, I realised how more complex and in tune Gabriel was, that I didn't really understand and observe as much as I did this time. But when I first read it, I loved Gideon. And when I tell you, I was so sure I was going to name my first child Gideon if it was a boy. Who names their fucking child Gideon in this day and age? I mean, honestly, weird names are making a comeback, so it could all still happen. But when I was 14, telling people I was going to name my child Gideon. But Gideon was such a prime example of that older brother who did go out and he did learn about the wrongdoings of his father and made an effort to change and distance himself. But also that conflict of wanting to distance yourself from a toxic family and a situation that you do not want to be in. But also having that younger brother who doesn't understand as well and has no knowledge of the insights of his father, and wanting to both stay with him because you love him. He's your brother. You want that familial connection. And yet there's a dangerous line you have to toe to keep in contact with the people you do care about and the people you do love, while also continuing to cancel yourself from the toxic side of your family. I mean, that's a lesson that we can apply to everyday life here. It's not just solely in these books, and it's such a deep message. But where we have Gideon, who went out and did the work himself and learned about these things, we don't actually see the thought process and the healing and the coming to terms with that side of things as we do when it is Gabriel. We watch firsthand from the first book when he's being a bitch and defending his father ruthlessly and carrying with him the sentiments that he has for women running the Institute, to starting to train in the Institute, learning Tessa how to act and fight, and getting that insight into, even though Tessa is a downworlder, is she that horrible? Is she really that mean? And having this turmoil of, are people as horrible as his father has always said they are? To the third one, where his father does eventually turn into the worm because of his demon pox, and he realises all of the dark things that his father has done, and realising why it's wrong, and understanding that he doesn't align with his father the way he thought. He just aligns with the nobility. He was brought up in such a way that it's just normal for him, and he doesn't know how to live and move on from that when that's no longer the life that he wants to lead, and that's not what he's being upheld to. We see for the first time him go through such a journey on these series that is so fun and good to see. We never saw it with Gideon. He's just sort of showed up already having gone through all this and knowing he needs to escape. Gabriel hasn't. He was all the way back, defending his father, justifying everything, believing he was right and wanting to do the same as his father, to suddenly defending Charlotte with his life. It was such a progression, and it wasn't solely because he fell in love with Cecily, which I'm so glad to see. As much as I love romance and falling in love with soulmates, I'm so glad that it wasn't solely Gabriel falling in love with a Shadowhunter that did like Charlotte and understood, and realising, okay, I'll change because she has changed and I love her. He really went through a roller coaster of up and downs where he was defending his father and then he realised he was wrong, and then the Inquisitor came in and he was willing to go against Charlotte, and then realising, no, we're going to play him, and then he came again, offering his nobility after everything, and again stepping back and thinking, no, this is still wrong, even though he had wrote the letter. He went through such a journey, and it helped to have Cecily there, and it helped massively to have his brother. And I think what the turning point was is when Gabriel and Gideon were standing outside the stables after the Inquisitor, after the Consul had talked to them and given them the chance to make up false claims about Charlotte, and they had that brotherly moment where Gabriel realised he just wanted nothing more than to trust his brother again. He just wants the same bond he had with his brother, the same life that they had. Not the power, not being in charge of anything, just the brotherly connection of being able to trust someone and love someone the way that they had, and communicate how they had when they were younger, and realising That's what he wants. He doesn't care about the power. He just wants his brother. That was a bit of a tangent. I'm going to rewind and go back to Jessamine a little bit. A moment that really stood out to me and broke me deeply was after Jessamine had betrayed the Institute and went to the Silent City, and Jem and Tessa had gone to visit her, and they had this whole talk about, give us information, we can help you, and Jessamine was just so devoted to marrying Nathaniel and loving Nathaniel and having this life once they got out of here. And then after they had left, in a dream state, there was the one scene when Jessamine was trying to carve things into the wall with her wedding ring, and the ring broke. This fucking book, bro. It was such a small and yet potent moment for me when she realised he couldn't even get a real diamond. She was so genuinely in love with Nathaniel and the life that they could have had and the belief that he instilled upon her, and then realising that the engagement ring, the memento he gave her of commitment for their life together, wasn't even a real diamond. He couldn't have even spent the time to commit strongly to this facade. He had no interest in Jessamine at all, which we all knew as the readers and through the stories, but Jessamine was so devoted. She was so sure that this was the man that she was going to spend her life with. And all he had to do was commit just a little bit to get her a ring, just to make it a little bit more believable. Show her that you had at least a little bit of commitment to pull her in a little bit more. And he couldn't even do that. Nathaniel in himself is such a conflicting character. I don't love him as a character. Obviously we're not supposed to love him. He's a very conflicting character. And yet the love we see Tessa have for him, it gives us that same conflicting feeling that we imagine Tessa would have, being confronted with the idea that her brother had betrayed her all these years, that he was putting on a false facade. And again, I do not remember that Nathaniel was not Tessa's biological brother. I genuinely thought that they at least shared the same mum or the same dad. I couldn't remember which, because again, I forget little details. I didn't even remember that her mum was a shadow hunter. So that in itself, again, I had to realise what was going on. But learning they didn't have any of the same parents and that it was actually her aunt that was his mom, I don't remember that at all. This is what I mean when I say it's so important to reread your classics, because I can pick up on these little things now. It was the same with Sophie. I don't know what it is about my memory, but I was so sure in the first book that Sophie would end up with the other servant boy. I'm so sorry, his name is escaping me right now. But the boy who eventually died defending the Institute, Cyril, replaced him. I was so sure, and maybe it's because I know that he did love Sophie and that he had a crush on her, and I just thought, well, eventually she would get over Jem and go with him, because I knew that she moved on and got with someone else, and I thought that it was him, but clearly it wasn't. So then when his family member came and replaced him, I was like, oh, so she's going to get with Cyril. I just had it in my head. It was that family. I'm so sorry, Sophie, that I underestimated you, because you ended up marrying Gideon, but I have no recollection of that. So again, every time I read about their story, I felt like I was back in middle school, learning over and over about this story and this romance that I have no recollection of. I'm so sorry to the Lightwood boys, but I have no memory of you. And then we have Henry and Charlotte, and oh my god, I love them so much.
Mama y papa, mama y papa.
Charlotte is such a cool character. I love everything about her. Watching her be able to fight against these men who, despite being shadowhunters and despite knowingly having women who fight to save you and fight to defend this world, you're not going to let them run an institute. You still believe in the misogyny, that they are powerless against a male, and yet you allow them to fight, you just don't let them be in charge, which is fucked up. And watching as Charlotte fought for her right and defended her institute soundlessly and so democratically, and watching the love blossom between her and Henry. In the first book, it really does seem as such a convenience marriage. It really does seem in the first book that their marriage was a marriage of convenience. And we see time and time again, people have the same sentiment. Even Charlotte herself is so sure that Henry does not love her. And watching her come to terms with the fact that, while yes, Henry is a little whimsical and a little obscure, and he has a devotion for his creations and his engineering, he still loves Charlotte. He loves her endlessly and will do anything for her. And it's so beautiful to see her realise this may have started as a convenience marriage for levels and power and dynamics, but they both fell in love with each other. And then they have a child. I'm gonna fucking cry talking about these two. It's just in every step of the way. Having Henry, who is such a loving and devoted husband. I'm gonna fucking cry, what the fuck? Not once has he said, Charlotte is a woman, she cannot do anything. He's always not just supported Charlotte in running the institute, but actively fought for it and encouraged it. And he knows himself that he would never be able to run that institute. And he's never once wanted to. He's always thought of Charlotte and known that this is what she wants. She deserves this. And he endlessly upholds her. And watching them come on this journey of a marriage of convenience to falling so deeply in love and supportive of each other, and then the battle happens, and I do not remember anything about that final battle. So when Henry went down, and it seemed like he wasn't breathing, I was out of it. I couldn't. I really thought he was going to die, and it fucking broke me. The idea that we saw this whole arc again. There's so many arcs and little bits and bobs in this fucking book that we see how devoted, and her realise. It's one thing to say, oh no, I do love you, but then to realise it and to show it and outwardly absorb that feeling, and then having Henry die, or at least seeming to die. I mean, we know in the end he was just paralysed and isn't able to walk again, and I'm glad that he is alive, but I didn't know that he was going to live, so I was a fucking mess. And then eventually the child is born, and they both solely agree, and Henry supports naming the child after Charlotte's last name, calling it Fairchild instead of Branwell. It just shows how he understands that it's not, he understands the hardship of being a woman, and he knows that Charlotte is so powerful and domineering, and he wants that for their child. He knows that despite how great and amazing the child may be, he's going to need the support and the power that Charlotte has. You can call it Branwell and have it be his name, but why would he want that pride and that ego boost when he understands that having Charlotte's last name and it being a Fairchild, it's going to have so much more of a strength behind its name because of the power and the effort and the fight that Charlotte has put in. He's just such a good husband. I guess some other little things before we move on to the main bit, which I'm sure you'll all understand what it is. I never thought I would be so devoted to a cat. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't hate cats, but I am always a dog person. I love dogs. That is my animal. I understand people like cats. I have a little bit of a fear of them, but I don't hate them. When I did not realise when everything went on with Jem and he left and seemingly died but then became a silent brother, I never thought of church. And then there was many little excerpts here and there where we see that church grieving for Jem. I'm gonna cry. And I have pets, and it's something. Holy shit! And it's something that all pet owners can understand. I need you to hold my hand because I'm gonna fucking break, and if I do, I'm mind your business. As someone who has had pets their whole life, I have never outlived a pet. But the older I get, the more I realise that that is a possibility and that it's most likely going to happen. I need to switch hands. And it's so much harder to try and explain to a pet where their owner has gone. I literally need to do this in breaks. Because if I say it all at once, it's not going to come out. It's just going to be... So having Jem's cat stay by his door and lounge around the house and actively be depressed is heartbreaking because he doesn't know where he is. So having him lounge around the house and being all depressed and waiting outside his room.
My God, pull yourself together!
He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't understand. He's a cat. You're supposed to hold my hand through this. You're not helping. Oh fuck, he doesn't know where he is. He's in a shadow winter. He doesn't understand. And I know that cats are intuitive. So it's likely he could smell that Jem wasn't alright, because apparently they have that sense. So he probably knew that he was dying. And after Jem had projected himself onto this cat as being caged, and he had to let the cage out. He had to open the cage, or he had to let the cat out. He had to take it home. He had to nurture that side of himself. And the cat loved him for it, obviously. And then for the cat to have this knowledge that he's ill and he's going to die. And then it disappears. And I know that he basically had, because when he became a silent brother, that whole part of him was cut off and he had to act as if he was dead. But he wasn't. There's such a fine line, which this book does so well, of having Jem be dead but alive. And there's such a pain and a comfort. And it's really bittersweet to have that knowledge. But at least they have the knowledge. The cat doesn't. The cat thinks he's gone. So that broke me, if you couldn't tell. And when I was reading it, I did have a bit of a memory. I was like, oh, he named it Church. That's fun. And then at the end, Magnus mentions that the cat is depressed. So they're on about letting Magnus have the cat. I don't understand how this cat has lived for so long. But Magnus is a warlock. So I can understand magic. You're telling me that while I was reading these Mortal Instruments, the fucking cat was Jem's cat? And then my thought is, at the end of the book, when we have the epilogue, we learn that Jem becomes Jem again, and he is cured, and he's able to live a second life. Do you think, because we know that Tessa and Magnus met up, so they were at least a little bit friendly, and I can imagine Magnus being Magnus. They're going to stay in touch. It's Magnus. He ain't going to let go. So do you think that it's possible? I need a little book. Maybe it exists. I have not read every single Shadowhunter book out there. But I need this. Cassandra Clare, please. Give me a little story. Give me a little detail. Does Jem get his cat back? And if he does, even if they just meet a little bit, and obviously it's Magnus's cat. They've been together centuries at this point. But I need them to have a reunion. And then my question is, does the cat stay immortal? Does it stay with Magnus forever and ever and ever? Or, if they had met, does Jem then take the cat back? And does Magnus say, yeah, okay, it was your cat at the start, it's your cat at the end, and then do they die together? Or does the cat outlive him? I have so many questions about this fucking cat. I think the cat is the longest I've been talking about any character. This fucking cat. Okay, I need a minute. Actually, fuck that, we're on to the big bit now. Jem and Will and Tessa. There are so many thoughts and feelings, but I don't want this to be 700 hours long. And I also feel like I don't have the ability to say all of the words that I'm thinking of. My first thought is parabatis are so gay. It's so confusing having watched and read the Mortal Instruments, where a parabati is seen as a brotherly link and a very familial connection, to then this book, which describes a parabati as something so much more deep and loving and soulmate worthy. This makes it seem so fucking gay. The whole thing in the Mortal Instruments was Alec being in love with Jace and how that was wrong because he was basically a brother. And yet these bitches basically could have lived as a throuple. I understand that at the time, sexuality and relationships were never that deeply immersed, unless you're Magnus Bane apparently. But if this was set now, it's so obvious that the three of them would just be in an open relationship with the three of them would just date simultaneously. And that would be fine. Like, the parabati seem so gay, and like it's such a deep-rooted love and connection and romance. And yet, the other one made it seem so brotherly that now I'm confused if they're supposed to be gay. It just all seems very lovey, incesty, and with Cassandra Clare, we know that that's fucking possible. But I need to know the definitive. I actually don't think I'm going to be able to talk about Tessa, Will, and Jem, because I love them so deeply, and it's so hard to explain reading their romance. And I think I'm a bit biased, because when I first read it, and the way that I was remembering when rereading, I was so devoted to Jem, and Jem is my boy. If there is ever a character that I love and that I choose, it's going to be Jem. When I was rereading, I remembered it as Tessa pretending to be in love with Jem and not actually loving him and just feeling sorry for him because he was dying. And Jem loved Tessa, so she felt like she needed to give him this because he was dying, and sort of like a dying wish. Whereas now, having reread it, she genuinely did love Jem. She genuinely did love both Will and Jem. It was just a really fucked up situation and a will they won't they kerfuffle. But in my head, I was like, fuck you, Tess. You were only dating him. You were using him. You didn't actually care about him. I felt like a 12-year-old being like, don't touch my man, because I was so sure that all of it was fake. And it wasn't until I reread that I was like, no, she genuinely did love him. You're just a stupid 14-year-old reading this. And I remember breaking down so harshly when I thought that Jem had died and Will did the whole dagger ceremony. And I also thought I was going to cry really hard at the epilogue, which, again, I did. I cried at a lot of points. But I remember these key moments of things that I'm like, okay, I need to prepare myself for this, because when I was 14, this was the worst part. However, when I read them, I did cry, and it was very fucking sad. But the part that got me the most was when Jem came back and said his final goodbye to Tessa as the silent brother. And then when he visited Will again, and having that moment where he had already said goodbye to Jem. He had given his love, given his blessing. They had that moment with Jem. And now he had to say goodbye and have this moment with Brother Zachariah. And that bit hit so much harder. Having Jem as Brother Zachariah be there and having all these emotions and not fully being able to express them because he has gone through this ceremony of being a brother. But also having him reflect upon himself and knowing that he chose to be alive but he isn't living. And saying to Tessa that when he's in the dark, I can't even talk about this book. And having him say to Tess that when he is in the darkness, he will picture it as the light, knowing that in the final battle she turned into an angel and was this broad light. I genuinely don't think I can talk about it. And having these moments where Jem seems to break through the silent brother physique. I mean, obviously he was meeting with Tessa in private, so we all knew he wasn't exactly strict on the rules. Knowing that when Will and Tessa named their first child James after him, he broke down. Like I'm fucking doing, apparently. And he cried, even though silent brothers aren't supposed to express that emotion. It just shows how disconnected he was. And when Will was on his deathbed, Jem found his violin, because they had kept it and it was in pristine condition and they looked after it so well. And he played. The emotion that must have had on Jem himself, knowing that he so deeply was going to miss his music. He said to Will that he wasn't going to submit himself to music. He's not allowed to play music. As a musician, having to get rid of something that is such a deep and integral part of your soul and knowing that you can never do it again, that's got to be hard in itself. And then finally, he's got the chance to break the rules and to play his violin again. But the reason for it is because Will is dying. And then, talking of the violins, the fucking moment that Will and Tessa finally got engaged at the Christmas party, when they were finally like, yeah, we're going to be together. That excerpt ends with the music from the Christmas party playing celebratory violins. What the fuck? He was there, and it shows that Jem is always watching them and always supporting them. Also the fact that it's very obvious Magnus was in love with Will and had a deep crush or connection to Will, and knowing that in the book Will has black hair and blue eyes, and eventually he finds the love of Alec, who also has black hair and blue eyes, and Magnus talks to Tessa about how she is lucky to have such a deep and devoted, unconscious love for two people when it's very rare anyone will ever find one. And Magnus finds that love in Alec years later, and he looks exactly like Will. There was also the fucking moment when Cecily was with Gabriel talking about his father just before Jem died, and they were having this connection of how they're scared of the Silent Brothers and how he doesn't know how to move on and he doesn't know what to do with himself. And Cecily sees that Jem is dead and that he's moved on with the carriages outside the window, and she takes that moment to reflect. She takes that moment to reflect on how deeply Jem was there for her brother, that she saw the Shadowhunter world as such a danger and a disturbance that had stolen her brother. Actually, it was his decision that kept him there, mostly Jem, and being thankful and grateful that he had Jem, and realising he wasn't alone and that he did have love in Jem, and wanting to do the same and wanting to be that same support, and having Jem say to Will earlier that his only wish for Will was to have faith. His only commitment was to give Will faith. And then at that moment she saw Jem die and realised how grateful she was for having Jem be there for Will, and she wanted to do the same for Gabriel, and ending with saying that she has faith in him. The cycle continues. It's a 6-6 cycle, you fucking bastards. I need to stop talking about this because I've cried like 7 times stood here talking. I've got to go have a shower. I've got to go on a run. I don't run. I just need to do something. Get this fucking story out of my head. I don't think I will ever get this story out of my head. I think it's going to be ingrained in my soul deeply. I gotta go. Because I'm a mess. Let's all feel in this. Hold my hands. I'm holding your hands a lot. I'm so sorry. You don't have to hold my hands, but if you wish, you can hold my hands. I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you are all staying safe. And as I say goodbye, I want you all to remember, I have faith in you. I have faith in all of you.